Hi, my name is Megan, and this is a 30-minute class that will discuss what is the pelvic floor, and we will do different postures that benefit the pelvic floor. What you'll need for this class is a yoga strap, a block, a towel or a blanket that is a little bit thicker. Those ones usually work better. And then a bolster or a heavier pillow. And this will be a combination of some restorative yoga postures as well as some standing, more active poses. So what is the pelvic floor? We hear this all the time at Blooma, and a lot of times people don't know what their pelvic floor is until something goes wrong. And it's our goal here at Blooma that you know about your body and your anatomy before something goes wrong. The pelvic floor is a group of muscles, and it runs from one sitting bone to the other sitting bone, as well as from your pubic bone all the way to your tailbone. And just like any other muscles in the body, some can be tight, some can be weak, some can be strong, some can be overused or underused. And since the pelvic floor is not as visible as, say, your bicep, for instance, sometimes we don't know what's going on down there until we hear something like there's incontinence, leakage, pain. And the goal of the pelvic floor is that it should be pain-free at all times and a system of support for your internal organs and for your structural integrity. So today we're going to talk about how to sit, how to stand, how to lay down in a way that supports your pelvic floor. The pelvic floor has 4 purposes, the 4 B's as we call them: babies, bowels, bladder, and breathing. One of the best things you can do for your pelvic floor is to breathe, which might seem overly simplistic, and yet you'll learn quickly in this class how beneficial breath can be. So let's get started. I want you to find a comfortable seat on your block, cross-legged. So we'll sit on the block, and it's pretty important that you come to the edge of your block. So you can feel your bony protuberances, called your sitting bones, your sits bones. You can feel them evenly onto that block. And then you can allow your crossed legs to rest in front of you. And let's bring our hands to our hips and start to tilt the pelvis forward. Notice how you go into a little bit of a back bend when you do that. You're in front of your sitting bones right now. And now do the opposite. Round back, curl, like you're rounding over a ball. Now you're behind your sitting bones. That's called a posterior tilt. Start to go back and forth between the two, kind of like a cat and cow movement. You're going into that slight back bend on your in-breath, and then exhale, go into that slight curl, that round. So ideally, when we have a neutral pelvis, we're neither in some huge back bend nor in some huge rounded back. And in our society, a lot of times the tendency is to sit in this rounded position. Think about people with desk jobs, or if you're driving a lot, or if you have a chair at home that kind of facilitates more slouching than sitting straight up. So there's a tendency to kind of always be sitting on our sacrum, which is this kind of big flat bone at the base of your spine. And for a functional pelvic floor, we want to actually sit up on those sitting bones. So just take those movements a couple more times forward and back, seeing if you can hone in on that place where, yeah, for the most part, it feels like my shoulders are over my rib cage or over my hips. I'm not in some huge back bend, nor in some huge tuck. And then once you find that place where it feels like pretty level in both sitting bones, find a soft gaze, or you can close down your eyes. Just take a really big breath in through your nose, and then out through the mouth. Try that a few more times. Big breath in, and open mouth sigh. Think about every time you exhale, your sitting bones getting just a little bit heavier. One more breath. And sigh it out. Now I want you to bring your hands around your rib cage. Palms can face down, and we'll continue breathing like this but just with a little bit more emphasis of, can you breathe into your hands? Can you breathe into your rib cage, not only on the front, but the sides and the back? So inflating a little bit more with each in-breath. And as you exhale, think about the rib cage getting more narrow, front ribs drawing together. And try that a few more times. Breath in, rib cage expands outwards in every direction. And then breath out. There's like a little engagement of your core. Let's try that one more time. Okay, so now we're going to continue doing that, but last thing we'll try is bringing hands to the low belly. So when you breathe in, the pressure goes downwards and outwards, and the pelvic floor gets a little bit of a stretch just by breathing in, which is why I said breathing is one of the best things you can do for the pelvic floor. And as you exhale, there's a little contraction of the pelvic floor, a little lift. And we'll practice that now. And if you don't feel anything right away, that's okay. This takes practice, and we'll try it on the blanket in a moment, which can be a little bit easier to feel as well. So bring your hands to your low belly. Think about your rib cage expanding again with each breath. But now we're going to add to that and think about belly and pelvic floor expanding as well. So breathe in through your nose. Rib cage expands, belly expands, pelvic floor widens. Now exhale, imagine your sitting bones grow together, like you're lifting a ball up between the sitting bones. Core engages. Then again, belly drops, rib cage expands. We're breathing in, pelvic floor widening and softening and stretching. Exhale, lift, like an elevator door, lifting and closing. Let's try that 3 more times. Big breath in. Breath out, pelvic floor lifts. Couple more. Exhale, there's this lift, contraction, and engagement. 1 more, fill. And exhale, engage, and lift. Okay? So now we're going to remove that block. And just notice, after sitting on the block, can you feel your sitting bones a little bit more? Can you feel that feedback of we're neither slouching nor we're in some huge back bend, but we're right propped up onto those pelvic bones. So good for your pelvic floor. Okay, so we're going to try to keep that neutral pelvis now and take both arms overhead and then exhale, hands to your heart. Let's try that 2 more times. Big breath in and exhale. Last one. Okay, so we're going to try our breathing again, but now with a little bit more feedback, using our blanket or our towel. So you can unfold it a few times and then roll it into kind of a tight little cylinder bolster. And there's 2 ways to sit on this. The first being you can put one knee on either side. So you're in this kind of low kneeling position. Okay. Sometimes that can be a little hard on the knees though, so if you'd prefer a cross-legged position, all you have to do is draw your blanket back. So again, you're kind of right on the edge of it. It's going to force your pelvis to tip just a little bit forward. And then you can come into your cross-legged position again. Essentially, we're just trying to get some kind of feedback on the pelvic floor so you can feel, is it moving? Is it not? Is it engaging? Is it not? All right, so let's try our breath again. And just take a moment to kind of feel, are my sitting bones evenly weighted on each side of that blanket? Make any little adjustments that you need. Notice if you're in a back bend or in a tuck, we want to find that in-between place. It's like you're growing roots down through your sitting bones. And then either close down the eyes or find that soft gaze again. So before you start your conscious breath, how heavy can you let your sitting bones and pelvis get? Can you allow your low back to relax without slouching? There's still a sense of lift in the heart. Shoulders are rolling down and back. And now we'll try our breath. So it's a breath in through the nose, lungs expand, rib cage expands, belly expands. And then as you exhale, think about pulling that blanket up between the sitting bones. See if you can feel a little bit of engagement between your sitting bones. And then inhale. belly drops, pelvic floor widens, softens, stretches. Exhale, there's that lift. Good, couple more, big breath in. Fill up your rib cage. Exhale, everything draws to center line and lifts. Slow belly engages too. Let's try one more. Everything softens downwards. Exhale, find that sense of lift and engagement. Good. Now we're gonna come off of our blanket and just one more time, check in with the sitting bones. Notice what that feels like to be on the floor. Hopefully you have a little bit more awareness of the musculature between the sitting bones and how they respond to your breath. And the next thing we're gonna do is come into all fours. So we'll come to our tabletop, our all fours position. And just like we did with our pelvic tilts and tucks, as you inhale, think about untucking your tail. So you're going into a little bit of a back bend, look forward. Anytime we go into this, what is called an anterior tilt of the pelvis, little tilt of the pelvis forward, it stretches the pelvic floor. Sitting bones get a little wider. And then every time you exhale, round the pelvis, curl, squeeze your sitting bones together, and now you're shortening the pelvic floor muscles. They're engaging. Let's try that a few more times. So you untuck the tailbone. Sitting bones widen, muscles stretch between those sitting bones. Exhale, curl around, squeeze your glutes. Those pelvic floor muscles shorten. Last one, nice and slow. When we move slowly, it gives us more awareness of maybe where we need to strengthen a little bit more, or maybe where we need to stretch a little bit more. And now find neutral. So you're neither in that tucked position nor that huge back bend. It's as though you're balancing a block on your low back. Tuck your 10 toes under. Try to keep your back stable. And next time you exhale, could you hover your knees just an inch or two from the floor? And then drop the knees, big belly breath. Exhale, squeeze, abdomen in, lift the knees. Let's try that 2 more times. So think about nothing else is really moving in the pelvis. It's just the knees lifting and lowering, and we're keeping our neutrality, which is so good for the pelvic floor and our core. Last one. And lower. Take a break in your child's pose. You can walk those hands forward. Let your head get really heavy. Maybe you sway a little side to side. That can always feel nice. And slowly make your way up back to your tabletop again. And this time we're gonna bend the knees, tuck the toes under, and press back to your down dog. So oftentimes in down dog, if the hamstrings are really tight, they'll pull on the pelvis, which is not so great for the pelvic floor. So I recommend in down dog, especially if you're working on really getting the pelvic floor to be functioning properly, to bend your knees a little or a lot. And then see if you can send your sitting bones up to the sky. So you get that nice stretch between the sitting bones. And if you want to start to straighten the legs a little bit from there, that's fine. But our focus and our goal here is that slight untucking of the tailbone. Sitting bones up to the ceiling, almost like there's flashlights on them. Let's take a few more deep breaths. Head is heavy. And then you can drop your knees back down and give your hips a little sway side to side. Let all that go. Okay, so now we're gonna come into our squat. You can take your blanket. It should already be in that blanket roll. And you can bring it behind your heels. So we'll come into our yogi squat, one of our favorite postures here at Blooma. You'll be in slight turnout with your feet, and then bring your hands to your hips. So what's common in a squat a lot of times is people will start to tuck the pelvis under. And as we discussed before, that tucked position is something that a lot of us are already doing too much of at desk jobs, seated in chairs that aren't very healthy. So when you squat, I want you to think about untucking your tail. Like you have this big, beautiful tail behind you that you don't want to sit on. okay? And having the blanket behind your heels will help facilitate that. So hands to hips, we're going into an untuck. That big, beautiful tail behind you is releasing. You can come down to any amount. You could always have your block here as well. If you did want to lower all the way down, it's not necessary, but you can try to do that. Just think about still that untucking of the tail. So sometimes it actually can be a lot harder to stay up like this. Okay, a little higher. And now can we breathe here? A lot of times when things get tricky, our breath gets shallow. And what we said earlier, the breathing is one of the best things you can do for the pelvic floor. Couple more, big belly breath. Think about those pelvic bones widening when you breathe in, and then exhale, they come together a little bit. Last one, big breath in. And then release. You can step off of your blanket, walk your feet forward about hip width distance, and just let your head hang heavily. You can bounce the knees a few times or pedal out the legs. And then as you're ready, you can move that blanket aside and we'll come all the way up to stand with your block. Okay, so we're gonna take the block between the thighs, about hip width distance apart. You can look down at your toes, make sure they're not gripping. And again, we're gonna practice being able to sit back without tucking under. Okay, because remember, tucking under shortens the pelvic floor. It can make it too tight. And we want a pelvic floor that is flexible and strong. And when you come into your chair pose, which we'll do in just a moment, this is very similar to how we get in and out of regular chairs in our regular life. So this is good practice for you when you're at home, sitting up and down. Can you do that without tucking? Okay, so we got that block between the thighs. We're squeezing it. We aren't in a tucked position. We aren't in some huge back bend. You can bring your hands to your pelvis here. And now I want you to think about, as you sit back, imagine there's an actual chair behind you. You're gonna start to untuck your tailbone. Keep your chest lifted, so you have this small little back bend here. Squeeze that block. And then as you rise up, press into both heels evenly and engage your glutes. Really squeeze, strengthen your glutes. Okay, we're gonna keep going. You can add the arms here if you'd like. Arms float overhead, tailbone untucks. See how I've got this nice back bend here. And then as you exhale, press into your heels, squeeze your glutes, squeeze that block. Can we do two more? Even slower. Big breath in. Exhale, think glutes on, both sides engaged. Last one. And exhale, lift. Good job. When you move slow like that and mindfully, you don't have to do a lot of reps, which is always great. Okay, so we're gonna come back down and let's find your strap and have your bolster nearby as well. We'll use that in just a little bit. Okay, so we're gonna come onto our backs for a moment. This is my favorite way to stretch the hamstrings. It's kind of the safest way to do it as well. Your hamstrings attach at your sitting bone, which we've been talking about the sitting bone, right? There's lots of pelvic floor muscles around there. So sometimes when the hamstrings are really tight, this can cause some pelvic floor issues. So a really nice way to stretch the hamstrings is you can take your strap around your right foot, loosen up your grip until your elbows can comfortably rest by the sides of your rib cage. This left knee could stay bent, or you can straighten it forward. And now take a look at your foot. Notice, do you have a tendency for the big toe to come back faster than the pinky toe, or vice versa? Could you pull on your strap ends to make the foot more parallel to the ceiling? And now really think about pressing through your heel. Can you energize the kneecap, the quads, the front of the thigh, in order to lengthen the back of the thigh? Breathing here. Every time you inhale, rib cage expands. And every time you exhale, navel draws to spine. Just a little core engagement. Let's try a few more here. Think about the head of the femur, the thigh bone. It's dropping down into the pelvis. This whole leg bone dropping down. Good. One more there. Now slowly release your strap and just straighten the leg. Notice that right side compared to the left for a moment. Maybe you have a little wiggle. Okay, now let's try that other side. You can loop your left foot. Loosen up your grip enough that your elbows can rest on the floor. Take a look at your toes. Make sure pinky toe and the big toe are even. There's not one that's pulling back more than the other. If you'd like to straighten that right leg, that's always an option. And now we breathe. A lot of times when we feel tightness or tension in the body, sometimes the response can be to breathe less or in a shallow way. Could you do the opposite? When you feel a lot, can you slow the breath down? Couple more here. Think about that whole thigh bone dropping down into the pelvis, like there's a little weight on it. Shoulders relax as well. One more. Okay, and then release that strap. Give those legs a little wiggle, let all that go. Gently roll onto your side and make your way up to seated. Okay, so next thing we're going to come into is a wide angle forward fold, which is very, very good to stretch the pelvic floor, but it does need to be done in a way that is a little kind of specific to make sure that you're not sitting on your sacrum. Okay, so I like to use this blanket behind me and the bolster. You can take your legs out wide and come to the edge of your bolster. So it's kind of forcing your pelvis to tip slightly forward, which is going to give us a deeper stretch in our hamstrings, and it will untuck the tail. We don't ever want to sit on our tailbone. One little funny piece of trivia about that, the coccyx, your tailbone, comes from the Latin for a cuckoo bird's beak. So I always like to say we don't want to sit on our tailbone, our coccyx. It's a bird's beak. Wouldn't feel good, right? All right, so we've got this nice, neutral, lovely pelvis, and toes are flexed up to the sky. You can have your bolster in front of you. If you want a little bit more height, you could put your block underneath your bolster, so you have more of a diagonal that you can soften into. It's also fine to stay seated upright. This might be enough for you. If you want to come further forward, think about tipping the pelvis forward, and then the spine is just going with. Then we're softening either the forehead or the cheek to one side. Imagining this freedom between the sitting bones, this untucking of the tail. Our breath is moving into our rib cage, our low back, our low belly, all the way down to the pelvic floor. One of the best things you can do for your pelvic floor is to learn how to breathe functionally. A lot of times when we get stressed or life feels chaotic, the breath can move really high up into the chest, the upper lungs, causing more tension in the neck, the jaw, the shoulders. So one of the best things we can do to decrease stress is to move the breath lower, using the bottom portion of your lungs, using your rib cage to move a little bit more with breath, allowing the belly to move, and then eventually the ultimate goal, having the pelvic floor respond to the breath, softening and relaxing with the in-breath, and then finding just a gentle contraction and engagement, a little lift on the out-breath. Where can you soften in this pose? Where could you lengthen the breath? Relaxing one more muscle, however subtle it may be. Sometimes we don't know how much we're holding until given space, time, and permission to relax and explore and be curious. Let's try a few more breaths here, softening into it. And then slowly inch your way back up to seated. You can take your peace fingers underneath your knees, drawing them back in. And we'll close with a restorative posture that's also very beneficial for the pelvic floor. So you can take your block underneath your bolster. You can bring your blanket roll underneath your knees. And then we'll come all the way onto our backs with the knees in Baddha Konasana, bound angle pose. So the feet are slightly together, knees are resting wide. You can lift your hips, do just a little bit of a tilt under of the pelvis, so you have a little bit more room in your low back. Low back can be a little bit closer to the floor. Hands might rest by your sides, or you could bring hands to the low belly. And there's a particular mudra that's kind of nice here called Trimurti. It's a downward triangle mudra. Thumbs touch, index fingers touch. And you can rest this gesture just a little bit below your navel. Trimurti means transitions. And this particular mudra is very, very beneficial for the second chakra, the reproductive area, the energy center of creativity. The element is water. We imagine more flow, more ease, a sense of adaptability and flexibility circulating throughout the pelvic region, the reproductive system, finding a balance between ease and effort, strength and flexibility. Our pelvis is the container, the holder, the foundation for our spine. When the pelvis is stable, the spine has a place to rest that is grounded and supportive. So as you rest here, bring awareness to the pelvis and the surrounding muscles and ligaments, resting, grounding, releasing tension, getting a little bit heavier with every exhalation. What can you let go of? What can soften? And relax the muscles in your face and your jaw. Relax the muscles around your eyes and behind the eyes. And repeat to yourself silently 3 times, I am stable. I move with ease. I am at peace. I am stable. I move with ease. I am at peace. And feel free to stay here as long as you'd like. Practicing presence, practicing this self-care and compassion for yourself. I thank you for joining me here today. Take care.